Hi, I'm Jez and this is Chasing Cars in the stunning Flinders Ranges in South Australia. And this is the intriguing Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster. We say intriguing because, well, we actually haven't driven the Grenadier wagon yet, which came out in 2023. And, well, it came about because a British billionaire spat the dummy when Land Rover wouldn't give him the rights to build the old classic Defender. So lots of interesting things to discover, not least A, can the Brits build a dual cab ute as well as the Japanese and American brands? And B, would you consider one of these over the iconic Toyota Land Cruiser 70 series? I'll tell you right now, it's certainly not cheap. Don't have to be a billionaire, but it starts from 102 grand. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
The Quartermaster is the second model from Ineos. There's also a van-style version of the Grenadier that you can get over in markets such as the UK. But here in Australia, there's also a cab chassis version to complement the tub ute, and that's an even more direct rival to the LC70. Now, Ineos hasn't simply taken a gas axe to the Grenadier wagon to create its dual cab ute. It's identical up to the B pillar, but then it's all very different from the back onwards, different design door, and of course, hey, look, you've got a tub. And that extra length, it's more than half a metre than the wagon. And part of that comes from an extra 30 centimetres in the wheelbase. Running gear, well, it's basically identical to the wagon. So you've got a basic but very robust ladder frame chassis underneath, beam axles, and to use that word intriguingly again, up front, a couple of BMW engines to choose from. Crossbars are standard, though of course no four-wheel drive is worth its salt without some very good accessories. So you can get a waterproof canvas canopy, there's a lockable roller tonneau cover. So spare wheel mounted sideways in the tub, which is a little bit unusual, but Ineos tells us they didn't want to put it underneath the vehicle because they wanted to make sure that ground clearance was everything for that off-road ability. Do have the option of mounting it horizontal in the tray, or it could even go on the roof. A couple of other features, but I want to focus on the tailgate to finish off. One negative, no damped opening, which is not great on a ute that costs more than 100 grand. But on the positive side, the tailgate will take up to 225 kilos, so you and a couple of mates can sit on here, crack open some beers, and enjoy a beautiful vista like this in the Flinders Ranges. What's the payload, I hear you ask? Well, that depends on the drivetrain. The closest the Quartermaster gets to a tonne is the turbo petrol model with 907 kilograms. The figure drops to 832 kilograms for the twin-turbo diesel model that Ineos says will account for about 4 in every 5 utes sold. That's still higher than the Gladiator's lowly 693 kilogram payload, but well short of the range offered by the leaf-sprung LC70. A brake towing capacity of 3.5 tonnes matches the Toyota and other leading dual cabs and gives the Quartermaster another advantage over the Gladiator, which also uses a coil-sprung suspension front and rear but can only tow up to 2.7 kilograms. You'll need to tow a small bank to an Ineos dealership. We warned earlier that it's pricey. The cab chassis kicks off at 102 grand, the double cab ute from 105k, then there's the more off-road focused Trial Master or more luxury focused Field Master. Both cost from $118,000 and pricing goes quickly further north once you get stuck into the lengthy accessories menu. I have to admit, I couldn't wait to get into the Grenadier cabin because I really love the A380 inspired cockpit. You've got this overhead console here. Now that's all dedicated to your four-wheel drive switches and pre-wired auxiliary switches, and then the center console, this bluff console down here, is your heating, ventilation, audio. So Ineos, they set out to replicate the old Defender. They weren't interested in building another modern 21st century four-wheel drive, but it does mean, whether intentional or not, that they have introduced some ergonomic foibles to the Grenadier, if you say. Now, one of those is that the left footrest is almost non-existent. I can't put my left leg out fully extended as I would like to, particularly on a long journey. The windows are auto down but not up. That's a minor thing. You've got the touchscreen to the left over here. It's quite glary, and the trouble with that is that it's not just for infotainment, it's also your speedo and other information relating to the drive experience, because ahead of you there's a little display right ahead of the driver which is just dedicated to letting you know whether you got your headlights on or certain four-wheel drive functions. The steering wheel, tilt and reach, but I couldn't quite get it to be as low as I'd like it to be. And you know, again, the driving position not perfect, but I will say these Recaro seats, and RIP Recaro, are fantastically comfortable, really nicely supportive, very well bolstered, classic Recaros basically. The steering is an interesting one. Ineos has gone with a recirculating ball box, so it's a setup, well, went out of fashion in what, the late 80s, early 90s. Most cars these days are rack and pinion, so the Ineos at least does have something in common with the likes of a Jeep Wrangler or a Suzuki Jimny. But there's a lot of lock-to-lock steering, so it's quite unwieldy around town. It's very vague on centre, so even here we're just driving along in a straight line, but you find yourself making these little corrections here and there to the steering because you can't quite place it exactly where you want it. The steering also doesn't self-centre, and the turning circle is a woeful 14.5 metres, a full metre wider even than the Grenadier wagons. Although the rear suspension has coil springs, the Quartermaster's ride, at least in the case of the 18-inch wheeled Fieldmaster model we drove, has similar characteristics to most leaf-sprung dual cabs, on the stiff side and jiggly over rougher surfaces. The unladen ride is resistant to bouncing, however, and with excellent Brembo brakes and good stability through corners despite the expected body roll, it's possible to feel confident pedalling the Quartermaster along a quick country road despite the flawed steering. Certainly one of the distinctions of the Grenadier Quartermaster is that it offers a choice of inline six-cylinder engines, a single turbo petrol or a twin turbo diesel. That certainly stands out in a sea of four-cylinder turbo diesels. Of course, there are the odd vehicles that have petrol, and you've got a Ford Ranger Raptor with its twin turbo V6, which we like a lot, of course. But who doesn't love a BMW straight six? And even in a four-wheel drive dual cab ute body style, that doesn't change. The diesel that we're currently driving, it's smooth, it's punchy, and even when you're driving along at 110 kilometers an hour, heading into the Flinders Ranges, it's not that noisy. It's really refined. We didn't get a chance to drive the alternative Petrol 6, which is also mated to an 8-speed ZF Auto. It offers more power but less torque than the diesel, and the petrol makes the Quartermaster faster but is less economical than the diesel. Got a ZF 8-speed gearbox. Again, that company is a gearbox guru. They rarely make a bad gearbox, and that's the same case in this Ineos. Very good at knowing when it needs to change gear, changes gear quickly, and there's also a dual range lever that we got to the left of the BMW borrowed gear lever, by the way. But that's for the next section. So the steering, yeah, you really do have to get used to it on the road. The way that it moves around even when you're going in a arrow straight direction, but feels much more natural on an off-road surface. And that recirc ball steering comes into its own in terms of the comfort of the steering wheel. It remains quite relaxed in your hand. It doesn't jump about even when you're going over corrugations or crests, like big bumps. And yeah, the car feels very solid, very robust, even when we'll be going across some pretty tricky, challenging terrain. There's been some tricky washouts, dry riverbeds, corrugations, as I've mentioned. And we've even had a bit of a play in some very deep, soft sand, where the Grenadier Quartermaster was pretty impressive. It seems hugely capable off-road. There are no fancy electronic off-road modes like you get with Land Rover's terrain response system, for example. It's very much a mechanical approach to the Grenadier Quartermaster, because that's what Ineos wanted. They wanted to create a much more traditional off-roader in the vein of the old classic Defender. So look, for hardcore off-roaders, I'm sure they'll get to grips with this vehicle very quickly with all the various diff locks and off-road modes that you engage in the overhead console. If you're a relative newbie to the four-wheel drive game, even with a little bit more experience, I think it will take a little bit more getting used to. So for example, for engaging off-road mode, you've got to be stationary, park brake on, hold this button up here, and I think it's a second press if I remember. Then you've got your front and rear diff lock. So a center lockable diff is standard on all models. Front and rear diff locks are standard only on the Trial Master, optional on the base model and the Field Master. And those front and rear diffs are engaged electronically via these buttons up here. They require one press, we're told, to be engaged. The red light flashes at you and then you start moving it off. Then it detects the differences in wheel rotation, engages the rear diff lock, for example, and away you go. So I have come to a stop here because you do need to do that to engage low range. You need to be in neutral on the regular 8-speed transmission, and it does require a bit of arm muscle to lift the collar up and pull the little lever for the dual range transfer case into low range. You can be rolling along with a little bit of speed for engaging for high. If you want to go through big puddles or even some rivers, the wading depth is 800 millimeters, so fairly generous. And that's whether you have the snorkel fitted or not. Again, that's something that's standard on the Trial Master, which is the most hardcore off-road version of the Grenadier, just like with the wagon. The Quartermaster certainly copped some hits to the suspension on these tracks that we've been heading across in the Flinders Ranges. It does feel tough as nails. Gives you a lot of confidence that it's going to stay in one piece. And commendably, when the times when we have gone back onto the bitumen, we haven't been hearing any squeaks or rattles from the car, even after some arduous off-roading. Oh, I'll give that a slam shut. Yeah, Ineos has really tried to build a classic Defender. So, lots of quirks with this vehicle, lots to like. Is it better than the Land Cruiser 70 series? Well, we'll need a twin test for the definitive judgment on that. But there are differences you really got to like about this vehicle, particularly those BMW straight six engines. They're going to hold a lot of appeal for buyers out there. It's also going to stand out in design in the city against a sea of ubiquitous Rangers and Hiluxes. But forget the city, because the off-road environment is where the Quartermaster is most definitely more at home. This is Chasing Cars. Don't forget to subscribe.